Welcome to the first presentation of the IES webinar series. I hope you're all staying safe and well, and thank you for staying educated. I am Anne Trull, President of the Victorian and Tasmanian chapter of the Illuminating Engineering Society, or the IES. If anyone has any questions, could I please direct you to the Q&A chat box below on your screen. If you can type your question into the chat box. We will try to answer as much as we can via that box with questions from our presenter at the end of the presentation. Speaking of which, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, David Ho of UNIOS. David is Head of Engineering and Product Development at UNIOS, who is also a Tech IES member. David has over 17 years of experience in many facets of the lighting industry, including engineering, consulting, specification, and retail. His background brings an interesting perspective to the product development and manufacturing sector, where he couples his passion about advancing the knowledge of lighting both within the profession and also out in the general public. So now I'll hand over to David to start his presentation on TM30, the future of measuring lighting color accuracy. Take it away.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate that. Good morning, all. My name is David, and I'm the engineering manager here at UNIOS. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Anne, Trent, and Paula, and IESANZ for hosting this webinar, and of course, the UNIOS team. Thank you all for joining me this morning, for those in Australia and Southeast Asia, and good afternoon to those in New Zealand dialing in. So today's presentation is in regards to colour, the key metrics we use to analyse colour, with a primary focus on colour rendering. And so without further ado, let's get started. Perfect. So we'll separate into three different segments here, breaking down what is colour, the key metrics themselves, and the last segment is a focus on TM30. So what is the visible light spectrum? It's the wavelengths between 380 to 740, consisting of 7 main colours, from violet all the way to deep red. And it's a small segment in the electromagnetic spectrum. Surrounding nearby neighbours is gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared, and microwaves. But with the importance of colour, we're surrounded by artificial light just as much. From these 5 examples you see in front of your screen, from when it's too dark and we need light to still be able to carry out tasks, from if we're an artist, trying to exude certain moods to the audience themselves, or even to get home safely to our loved ones at night time. These are just a few examples of how artificial light impacts us on a daily basis. So the harmony between colour that we're surrounded by and artificial light itself is extremely important. And here as lighting professionals and all who are dialing in today, hopefully we'll uncover a bit of that. So touching upon that second slide there, with create moods for the observer, by showcasing a particular set of colours, I want to run a little bit of an experiment for my audience today. And that's to make sure that I'm just not speaking to any, I'm speaking to someone and not no one. So on your screen there, you should see the colour red. Or is it? No, it is the colour red. But what I wanted to do is ask a little bit of a quick poll question for you all. So I'm just going to set that up now. And the poll will hopefully show up on your screen there. And the question I want to ask is, what emotions or feelings do you associate with the colour red? And I can see a lot of you are filling it in now, so thank you very much. It means I'm not alone. But does it mean option A, anger, passion, intensity, purity, innocence, and soothing? Or do I feel secure, full, and disagreeable? And a lot of you have already filled in the poll, so thank you. So I am going to end it, and I'm going to share the results. And 93% of you said anger, passion, and intensity. A surprising, or not really surprising result. Because when we look at items and objects that surround us in the world and brands that we associate with, the message is there, the symbolism is there. From red roses to how we tie that with love and passion, to an intensity of a fiery red hot chili. It's because of our culture and our upbringings and our backgrounds that we associate certain colors with certain emotions. But you may not have known this, but brands do it just as much to symbolize what they stand for. From Beats, where they associate themselves with high caliber athletes and high intensity energy for the pinnacle of their performance, to Virgin, the adventurous, the little bit of the notorious type. Virgin Airlines associates the color red because of that fact. And I've got a second one for you. This one's a little bit more tricky, I think. The color purple. Do I feel cheerful, stimulating, serene, cool, sad, and social? Or mysterious, regal, and prideful? And the results are coming in fast, so thank you for filling it in. It makes this much more enjoyable. I'm just going to quickly end the polling there, and I'm going to share the results. So there's 83% of you have said mysterious, regal, and prideful. And you would be correct. We associate the color with pride, royalty, prestige, which is why the crown is purple. Magicians wear purple for that mystery and that magic. But brands like Premier League, Hallmark, use it to set that pinnacle of brand reputation. So when we're looking at common color interpretations, we do associate certain emotions. And the harmony between light, artificial light, and color is paramount, especially for those who are interested in lighting, which are all of you dialing in today. Us as lighting professionals have the responsibility to light up our projects where necessary, as best as possible for our occupants in the space. That is why we do what we do, simply put. Which leads me into the fundamentals of color. So in 2004, the Lighting Research Center conducted a survey amongst approximately 240 lighting professionals. And they asked one simple question. Out of these 6 different types of projects, what do you value more? Lighting efficacy or color? And out of the 4 of the 6 choices, color importance came out on top. And they were asked a second question. When color is of importance, what do you rank as a key metric to analyze? And they had about 10 choices. Out of the 10 choices, I've shown the top 4, excluding lamp type bases. Because when the question was asked in 2004, we obviously had a plethora of different lamp choices to use. When we are talking about in this day and age, and we are predominantly using LEDs, I've selected the 4 key metrics, removing the lamp type selection. So we're going to dive into each of these 4, because I think it is vital. Correlated color temperature. We all know it. We all use it to base our color selection of our luminaires themselves. Anything from the warm tone to 1800 Kelvin, all the way to a cool white to a cool daylight, which is generally 6,500 Kelvin plus. But why is this important? Because when you are lighting up different spaces, the selection of the correct color temperature is vital. From a productive space like an office, and you use a cooler color temperature to suppress melatonin. That way, occupants in the space feel more awake, more productivity, whereas on the contrary, into your own personal home, to a restaurant, to a bar, where you tend to use warmer tones to make occupants feel more relaxed. to generate melatonin. And we won't dive into that rabbit hole of circadian rhythm today. But what I've shown on the left-hand side is the 1931 color chromaticity space diagram. And on that diagram, there is that black line that you see. And hopefully you can see my little mouse trigger. It's that black line there that I'm referring to. And that is where the Kelvin of white light sources actually sits. We're not talking about your deep red specific color LEDs. We're not talking about your deep blues. We're not talking about your deep greens. We are predominantly talking about white light sources. And that's known as the Planckian locus, or the BBL, black body locus. We then look at color stability and color consistency. These were ranked 3 and 4 in key metrics, and they're often mixed between the two. But there is a separation and there is a difference. And I love this slide for a reason. That's actually a real life photo on the right-hand side there, taken in Australia. And time is the biggest difference between color stability and color consistency. Imagine day one, and you just installed these luminaires and you wanted to turn it on. And you got that sort of result. That would be color consistency. From a batching method in LEDs and production, from day one, the inconsistency of color temperatures is what we refer to as color inconsistency. Whereas if we're talking about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the track, and imagine day one, they all look like the handrail art on the left-hand side there. They were all exactly the same. But over time, things started to change. Colors started to shift, which is why color stability is often known as color shift in the lighting industry. That is the difference between color consistency and color stability. Why is that important? Well, for human comfort and for aesthetics. When we're talking about color, we're talking about two different things. One, from the light source itself, and two, the objects they are shining on. That's where color is, and both are just as important. From not only the wall that you can see in that picture there, how it looks, but also the light coming out being that inconsistency. It just doesn't look pleasing. But it's also important for industries where color consistency is vital. For example, the medical industry and for museums. Showcasing an artist's artwork consistently the way they envisioned is vital. So color consistency. We know it in the lighting industry as SDCM, or standard deviation color matching, or McAdams steps. And it's quite an easy guide. It's from 1 step all the way to 8 steps. The larger the step, the bigger the variance amongst a single batch of production of LEDs. And research studies have shown that the human eye can begin to detect anything beyond 3 steps. Which is why luminaire manufacturers try to get as tight of a binning as possible, as tight of a step as possible, to ensure that the result delivered on day one looks exactly the same. Color stability or color shift. I've shown there on the slide there a 1976 chromaticity diagram, and it's generally used to detect color shift. So we've got the BBL there as shown, and LEDs tend to do 4 different things over time. They either have a green shift, a red shift, a yellow shift, or a blue shift. And the key functionality there is over time, not from day one. And I've shown a diagram there of 4 different types of lamp sources: LED, CFL, halogens, and metal halides. And LED looks pretty good, right? It's the slowest change. So on the y-axis there, you've got the change in color. And on the x-axis there, you've got hours over time. And LED looks pretty good. It's consistent. It's better than the other three options that you've got there as well. But LED is marketed as a light source to last for a very long time, much beyond its predecessors. Back in the days of CFL, halogen, metal halide, if the color shift was too large or the lumen maintenance had dropped way too low, it was simple. Swap out the lamp, swap out the ballast. With LEDs, they're advertised to last over 5 years, 10 years span. So it's even more paramount that color shift is maintained at a very slow incline over time, such that we only use one light source. We don't have to swap out the LED chip. We don't have to swap out the LED fixture itself. Now, the reasons behind color shift, some are avoidable, some are not. Color shift is inevitable. It's a matter of time, not a matter of when. And one of the primary influences of color shift is junction temperature. The hotter you tend to run an LED chip beyond its means, the faster that color will shift over time. The phosphochemistry and the materials that are used from an LED manufacturer level are vital, which is why it's always recommended to use a high reputable brand. But something that you may not have considered is the LED source is generally governed by a housing of some sort, be it a downlight, be it a profile, you name it. And within that housing, we use materials like lenses, reflectors, diffusers, and each one of those different factors can contribute to color shift. Why? It's because light is bouncing or refracting off these materials. And from a visual perspective, as you can see on the image on the right, what we see is beyond the luminous housing itself. And so when you have corrosive environments or sulfuric environments, something to consider is the type of materials you are using. Because if the material changes but the light source is great, you still may get a similar result to what you see on the right there. Now I'm going back one slide and I was showing over time the change. This is actually from an LM80 report. And we predominantly have used LM80 reports in the past to measure only lumen maintenance. That is the brightness of an LED reduction over time. But color shift has always been there. But we didn't have anything to measure the longevity or the extrapolation of that lifetime until now. In 2019, IES released TM30 If you haven't read it, I do highly encourage you to read it. And it talks about projecting color shift beyond its testing period. So similar to TM21 for lumen maintenance, TM35 does the same for color shift. And our last metric, but the most important, color rendering index. It's been a long-standing method over time to use how we measure color quality. And it's a simple measure. It's 0 to 100. 100 being a light source being able to reproduce colors as if they were outside in daylight. So perfect, or depending on what you deem to be perfect. However, CRI has a vital flaw. As you can see on the diagram on the right here, CRI, or what we known in the industry as RA, predominantly uses only 8 pastel colors, R1 to R8. But a key component missing there is R9 to R15, which includes your deep reds, your deep greens, and your deep blues. There is an uncommon term out there that's generally not used, which is R1 to R15, and that includes all 15 colors. But 99% of lighting brands out there advertise the RA value, and rightly so. Because if they were the only ones to advertise RE, they would look a lot inferior compared to their competitors. So they do what the rest of the market does. There is also not a common way to measure saturation or chroma, so the intensity or the vividness of color. And that's another flaw. Now, lighting professionals tend to do two things. They ask for CRI, but they also tend to ask for R9 value, and that's your deep red. And because R9 is the hardest to hit across those 15 different colors. However, there is a general rule of thumb. On the slide you see there, you see CRI 70, 80, 90, and 100. And the rule of thumb is, when it's CRI 80 plus, R9 tends to be greater than 0. When it's CRI 90 plus, R9 values are greater than 50. And when it's CRI 97 plus, R9 values are greater than 90. It's very difficult to hit 100. The only light source that did was halogen. But unfortunately, it uses too much power, produces too much heat, does not have a long lifetime, and too much maintenance. So as we discussed there are some flaws with CRI. It doesn't tell the whole picture with the figure that you see on most data sheets out there, which is why TM30 was introduced. And with our key focus today, I introduce TM30. So TM30 was first released by IES in 2015, but it was revised in 2018 and it was officially recognized by ANSI. And if you disconnect, not walk away, but if you disconnect from this webinar today, remembering two things about TM30, remember these two words: Fidelity and Gamut. There are also 48 other hue-specific measures. And on the right-hand side there, I've kind of shown the different types of graphs you can get from them. But there is also one key graphic that, in my opinion, is vital, and which is what makes TM30 highly successful, and that is its color vector graphic. But we'll start with why TM30 is potentially better than CRI. Now, we talked about 15 color samples with CRI, but we talked about predominantly using 8 different color samples. TM30 uses 99. And these 99 colors were based off over 105,000 different objects that best represent the world's colors. That color scheme was slimmed down to 65,000, down to 48,000, down to 4,800, should I say. And that was still too many. But we finally came to the conclusion of 99 colors. And the 99 colors, as you can see on the left-hand side, is fairly flat in terms of sensitivity. So there's no key biasy there. But as you can see with the 8 test color samples that you saw in CRI, there's many peaks and troughs. So you can kind of get away with it, essentially. So what is the Fidelity Index? Both the Fidelity Index and the Gamut Index are average values, and the key word there is average. And it's similar to CRI. The highest value is 100, and 100 being the best representation of a reference illuminant that represents outside or daylight. But the key difference here is all 99 different measurements must be used. Not like CRI, where we only use the 8 and we throw away the rest. Or not throw away, but it's there. Fidelity uses all 99. And that's the key difference there. There's no way to hide. Fairly straightforward. So that's one measurement down. Type of Gamut Index. This one's a little bit more tricky, so we're going to spend a little bit more time on it. The Gamut Index is a measure of chroma. Now, you may not be familiar with the word chroma, term chroma, but most of us are familiar with saturation. If you've tinkered around in Photoshop before, you can desaturate things, make them look a little bit more dull, or you can saturate or oversaturate things and make it look a little bit more vivid. That is what we're talking about when we're referring to chroma. And it roughly ranges from 60 to 140. And when I say roughly, I'll explain in a moment later on. But what you can see with the images on the right-hand side there is you have the original RG value of 100, which is your benchmark value. And anything less than 100 is clarified as a desaturated value. And anything greater than RG of 100 is known as a saturated or oversaturated value. What's the difference? Well, in the original, you've got a fairly great CRI light source there. CRI of 95 with the chroma bang on 100. Or the Gamut Index bang on 100, should I say. But then you've got a desaturated value there, and you can start to see the reds, the deeper colors, start to lose a bit of their oomph. You can even see it in the cheeks and the arms of the person. But then you've got the same CRI, so shouldn't it be the same? But then you've got a Gamut Index of greater than 100. And you can start to see the reds, even the greens to a certain extent, start to pop. Almost look a little bit unrealistic. And you are right. Because oversaturating or desaturating starts to shift away from what it would actually look like outdoors. Now, as an average value, it's very hard to tell what does that mean when it's greater than 100 or less than 100. It's only a guideline of the average result. So it's best depicted in a vector graphical representation. And so we've got the color space diagram on the left-hand side there. We divide that up into 16 equal hue bins or shades. Now you see two sets of dots there in the second image, red and black. Black being the reference luminance or the benchmark, so fidelity of 100, Gamut Index of 100. And then you've got the test source that you're essentially reviewing or judging, and that's the red. We then group each of the dots in each of the hue bins to a single dot, and we link them all up together, as you see in this third diagram here. But to make things easier to review, we normalize the reference illuminant, the black one, into a perfect circle, essentially. So we can easily compare the difference between the test source that we're reviewing and the reference source. Now, anything beyond the black line is deemed as greater than 100 for that particular hue bin. Anything within that black line is less than 100. Fairly straightforward, right? But I'll give you this example here, and they may not have been drawn perfectly, but they'll do the job for this example. Imagine both Gamut Indexes are 100 here, but they tell a completely different story. The left-hand side, as we can see, has a saturation or an oversaturation in the yellows, the light greens, and the purples. But then we've got a strong desaturation in the red, oranges, and deep blues. But on the right-hand side, we've got the opposite. We've got an oversaturation of red, an oversaturation of purple, an oversaturation of blue, but a desaturation in yellow and purple. Why is that important? Well, imagine you're a fruit and veg owner, or you're a car dealer with a prancing horse and sell predominantly red cars. I won't name that name, but I think you know who it is. Imagine you wanted your tomatoes, apples, or your red cars to look the best they've ever seen. So when someone walks through your showroom, they go, wow, doesn't that look great? As soon as they drive it out, it might not look the same. Or as soon as they take out that fruit and veg, it might not look the same. But as a business owner, You've done what you needed to do, essentially. So as lighting professionals, sometimes we do want that extra bit of saturation to make things look a little bit more better or a little bit more vivid. And that is where this graphical example becomes really handy. Because when we get a test light source, which we'll go through at the end of this presentation, you get to pick, or you get to choose what you want to achieve in the project that you're conducting. There's also an advanced version of this, which is known as the advanced color vector graphic, which gives us a lot of the information we do need. It's got the Fidelity Index number in the corner, top left-hand corner. It's got the Gamut Index number on the top right-hand corner there. It's got the CCT value, its initial variance value, color consistency value from day one. And then you've got the Gamut Index or the chroma intensities for each hue bin. You may also see some black arrows. And they do have a meaning. We talked about the 48 other different hue-specific measures. And those black arrows are a huge part of that. There's one called hue shift, which, according to hue bin 4, for example here, it starts to shift to the right. What does that mean? Well, it means your light source that you're reviewing right here, the red one, potentially might make yellow objects appear more orange. And so when we're talking about hue shift, we're talking about what it should be and what it might look like. That is the difference with hue shift. The longer the arrow also means the further away it is from the benchmark, the black line. And that tells a story of fidelity, and that also tells a story of chroma as well. So saturation, desaturation. The further it is away from the black line, the more oversaturated or the more desaturated it is. And the 48 other hue-specific measures are generally best depicted by bar graphs, as you see there. But I won't spend too much time on this particular page, because in the final report where I've got an example, we'll uncover it a bit more there. We've got a two-axis diagram. And on the axis we have there is Fidelity Index. And on the y-axis there, we have Gamut Index. And the reason why I say approximately 60 to 140 for the range of Gamut Index is it can be lower, it can be higher. Because as you can see at the bottom here, the Fidelity Index only goes from 50 to 100. But if you're using or testing a light source that goes below a Fidelity Index of 50, I strongly recommend you find a new one. So they have an inverse relationship. And it makes sense. The more I make something look less realistic, the more I can start to stretch those boundaries and to make it look fake. The more I can desaturate the object and steer away from its natural colors, or the opposite, oversaturate it. So I've got my third and final poll question for you, and hopefully you're still with me after approximately 30 minutes of presentation. I've got two dots there, as you can see, purple and blue. Now the blue dot has a Fidelity Index value of 96 with a Gamut Index of 102. And I've got a purple dot there with a Fidelity Index of 79 and 97 as a Gamut Index. And the poll question I have for you is, with the purple dot that you see there, do you think it is a CRI 80 plus luminaire? Do you think it's a CRI 97 plus luminaire? Or it must be a trick. It's neither. Have a think about it and fill in your answer. And it will also determine whether I've conveyed my message correctly today. A lot of you are taking a bit more time, which is interesting. Either that or you've fallen asleep, which I hope it's not the last one. I'll give a few more seconds to help fill it in. And it's fairly close. This is interesting. And I'm just going to end the poll right there. It's a mixed bag, which is very interesting. So do you think the purple dot is a CRI 80 plus or a CRI 97 plus downlight? And 48% of you voted it's a CRI 80 plus. 21% of you voted CRI 97 plus. And 31% of you voted it's a trick, it's neither. The answer is it's a CRI 80 plus downlight. And in this comparison example, we can see that CRI is somewhat linked to the Fidelity Index, and they both measure the same property. However, it's not always that close. And the reports I'm about to show you explain why. So this is an integrating sphere report, or a spectrum test report, that measures the colorimetric values of a light source. And it has your CRI values, has your TM30 values, has your Fidelity Index, etc., etc. And we'll go through that now. Both luminaires, the CRI 80 plus and the CRI 97 plus example, were 3000K downlights. And so as you can see here, the CCT is roughly 3035. Hopefully you can still see my mouse there. And we've got an RA value of 98. So it's hitting that 97 plus mark. And you've got those R1 to R15 colors we described in CRI. So overall, this R9 value is hitting 99. It's pretty good. Then we go on to the next page, and we see the Fidelity Index value of 96 with a Gamut Index value of 102. And that's where it roughly sits in the two-axis diagram that we saw there. And the fidelity by hue, remember the averages. 90s across the board. If I got those marks in school, that would be great. Parents would be proud. But the color vector graphic as well. So the white line that you saw there, that you see there, is the reference luminant. And the black line shows the variance. Now, when we talked about a fidelity value being closely linked to 100 in chroma, or 100 in Gamut Index, sorry, they're pretty much bang on. And so when I look at the last page of information, and we've got those other 48 hue-specific measures here, we've got the chroma shift. There's not much desaturation, if any. It's only yellow by -1%. But the rest is actually showing an oversaturation. Now, it's each to their own whether this is an ideal light source or whether you do want a bit more saturation. And it tells the difference between the chroma, the hue, and the fidelity as well. So they're the other 48 that you see. Now I've got the CRI 81. And this is where things get interesting. Still a 3000K downlight, RA value of 80.4. But the CRI value here, or what we know as RE now, is the average of the 15. And it tells a different story. R9 drops off a cliff. It's 0. And when we look at the Fidelity Index and the Gamut Index value, it's 79, it's 97. Gamut Index is pretty good, right? It's 97. This is the true test. Big story difference teller here. So your fidelity values are much lower across the board. They're probably my grades there. And then you look at the color vector graphic, where you've got the white reference luminant, and then you've got the black line, where you've got a huge desaturation in your oranges and reds. You've got a huge desaturation in your blues. But then you've got a little bit more oversaturation in your greens, yellows, and purples. And this is where CRI doesn't tell the full picture. It doesn't tell me whether I'm going to get my objects looking as pristine in particular color sets that I want. Same thing, but in bar graph form. We get a huge desaturation in hue bins 1 to 3, 9 to 10, and 16. But you get a bit more saturation in your 4, 5, 6s, and etc. So what I'm trying to convey here is the Gamut Index value is not just something to go, oh, it's close to 100, or it's slightly better than 100. You know, it's great. The key essential detail there is looking at the color vector graphic to really explain what we're getting from this test light source. To recap, we uncovered CRI and we uncovered the potential flaws that we have in CRI, where we've got 8 core color samples that we predominantly use for RA, with in the background the hidden 7 other color samples. Whereas TM30, the core color samples, there are none that we just hide in the back pocket. It's all 99 that we see there. We've got the Fidelity Index and the Gamut Index, remember those 2 terms? And we've got that color vector graphic. So a visual representation of what we're getting out of the color properties of a light source. Something that we didn't have with CRI, we only had a single figure there. However, CRI is well established. The only downside, it's got 8 pastel colors it commonly refers to. Whereas TM30, it's not fully adopted in the industry and it's relatively new. So to summarize, when using CRI, pair it with another metric. Or when using RA, pair it with another metric. Do what you have been doing in the past, which is use the R9 value too. I think that's really great. But now you've got more metrics at your fingertips. The Fidelity Index, the Gamut Index, the color vector graphic. To really produce the best results possible across your plethora of projects. And that was the goal of TM30. To provide a metric for us to use to better analyze a light source because of the flaws of CRI. Following this presentation, there is a white paper on TM30 itself, which uncovers a bit about what we've learned today in a bit more detail. And there's Universal Light magazine, which is a great magazine published by professionals within the industry. I'm David, and thank you for joining my webinar.
Thanks, David. I'm sure you can hear the applause if everyone had their microphones on mute. I guess that's one of the symptoms of holding online webinars. Thank you, everyone, very much for attending and staying educated. And thank you to David for a very enlightening presentation. I'm sure it wasn't that easy. We've got about 12 minutes left of the presentation. David, we've got a few questions coming through. They're coming through like hotcakes. If you can read out the name, the question, and provide your answer, that'd be great. We've got our team on the panel as well, who can also type answers for the benefit of everyone as well. So David, take it away.
Definitely, fire away, guys. Any questions you do have, I'll do my best to answer them. We've got one from Anonymous, which is fine. Be anonymous if you like. And I will answer this question live. So does dimming an LED affect the TM30 chroma results? Great question. We actually conducted this with the same CRI 97 plus sample that you saw in the reports. And we dimmed them down to 50% and we dimmed them down to 25%. But the results were exactly the same. However, something that you may want to look into is called the Hunt effect, which is what the human eye registers as desaturation in correlation with a less bright object. It's known as the Hunt effect. I encourage you to have a look up of that topic there. Can this hue bin measurement be linked to the light? So we've got another question. Can this hue bin measurement be linked to the light color spectrum for plant survival? Great question. I would imagine when you get an increase in the red and the deep blue spectrums, which is predominantly what plants live off, you would see a spectrum increase, then XBD increase in your blue wavelengths and your deep red wavelengths. So yes, they are correlated. However, the best is to use an SBD diagram. Let's see what else we have. We've got Adrian here with the question of, do we tend to see more of a color shift in LEDs of 4000K compared to that of 3000K? Good question. We tend to see more of a shift in 4000K luminaires. So we start to observe a bigger color difference in 4000K, or the whiter the LED goes beyond. That's the difference there. Martin's got a question here. So how is TM30 calculated? Is the spectrum input into software? Great question. So if you've got the equipment on hand, you can do it by two easy methods. You can use a spectrometer, handheld spectrometer, take it into a dark room and measure the light source itself. Most up-to-date handheld spectrometers have the TM30 drivers installed on them, which will give you exactly what we saw in those reports at the touch of your fingertips. Integrating sphere, which is what I used in these reports, do the same thing. However, that's generally more laboratory-based equipment that take up a bit more space and a bit more size. You can actually grab the SPT values off a handheld spectrometer if it doesn't have the TM30 drivers. And off the IES website, there is actually an Excel spreadsheet you can download, which allows you to input all the SPD wavelengths. And it will produce the TM30 results for you. So you can do it that way as well if your handheld spectrometer doesn't have the drivers. They're generally the three different methods you can use. This is an interesting question. Simon asks, when R9 became the norm, the luminaire cost increased. Will TM30 drive up manufacturing costs hugely and make lighting cost huge for a project, as the phosphors used will need to be very specific and more time to manufacture? Will the industry accept these increases against a higher CRI with a higher R9? Great question. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can't see that TM30 will influence the cost of a luminaire, and I'm surprised R9 did. Predominantly, I imagine, is because the market also started to release higher CRI fittings, 90 plus, 97 plus, 95 plus. And yes, there's more phosphors used and it's a bit more harder to control, but TM30 is a metric that uses the same light sources that have already been produced. Yes, there are LED manufacturers who are producing chips to specifically hone meat, plants, flowers. They might do it, but that's predominantly due to a supply and demand, I would argue. So it's something that's beyond their natural mass production. And so it's a little bit more difficult to make, a little bit less quantity, so economies of scale there, and which is why that would drive up the price. However, we're talking about white LED light sources to use in most general spaces. I can't see TM30 being a new metric, adding or driving prices of LEDs to be higher. Let's see. So I've got another one here. I've lost it because questions keep coming in, which is great. Simon also asks, will TM30 be accepted by manufacturers in Europe, USA, and Asia for distribution into Australia and New Zealand? Great question. I was actually hoping to look into that in March during Light and Build, but obviously with the pandemic we're in, Light and Build was postponed, as you all probably know. So I didn't get to see that information if it was included in the new data sheets or catalogs. Maybe some who do represent those brands would know. TM30 was accepted by ANSI, which is American National Standard based. So I'd imagine USA to be picking up the criteria quite quickly. I can't see why other countries or other lighting brands not picking up the data as well, because it conveys extra information for lighting professionals to use. I guess it's who came first, the chicken or the egg? Do lighting industry professionals ask for the data such that lighting brands have to convey and provide that data? Or do lighting brands provide the data first to educate lighting professionals to go, hey, this is the data you should be using? That's a question I can't answer. Akshay here asks, what criticism has TM30 drawn other than industry acceptance and cost? Cost is an interesting one. I'm not, well, at least in my circle, and I can only comment on my circle, besides the potential equipment upgrades you would have to purchase to test TM30, in terms of the light source itself, we've been testing light sources that were produced before TM30 really came out. So yeah, it's an unusual one with cost there. But are there any criticisms with TM30? None, besides the fact that it's new. You know, is it ready for the market? We tend to be, you know, comfortable and using what we do have. So I think it would take a big drive from the whole industry itself to really go, hey, this is what we should be using. Similar to what we did with luminaire maintenance and lifetimes, how that became the norm. I think TM35 will become somewhat a requirement in the near future. Thanks for some of the comments too, guys. I really appreciate it. Andrew Richardson asks, so just to clarify, the test reports at the end were measured using CRI, hence 15 colors, and not to TM30, 99 colors. The report actually had both. So the integrating sphere with the new uploaded drivers can produce data for both. So, and that is why there was 3 pages for each light source. And the first 3 pages were in regards to the CRI 97 plus light source. And the last 3 pages were in regards to the CRI 80 plus light source there.
We'll probably have 2 more questions and then we'll finish up.
Noted. Udara, apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, asks, does the color of the base LED chip color has an effect on TM30? For example, blue, red, or purple. If you're referring to specific wavelength LED chips, for example, 380 nanometer violet chips or 700 nanometer red chips, TM30 tends to only test for white LED light sources, not specific wavelength color LEDs. So I can't, yes, you wouldn't use those particular wavelength chips in TM30. Jackson asks, are the values measured at every incident angle around the luminaire and then average to take into account color over angle? Well, we used an integrating sphere for ours, so it's the light that's being produced by the luminaire itself bouncing off the integrating sphere, running into a sensor. So any colors that are affected at different angles that overall affect the outcome of the light source itself is tested. It's not like a goniophotometer where it does test at specific angles. However, if you did use a rotating mirror goniophotometer, I haven't seen the test results myself personally yet. It may actually take into account every incident angles. And I know what you're trying to say there, especially with S&D chips. If they had that little bubble, you might see a difference in yellow or a difference in white, even though you've got a 3000 Kelvin chip towards the side of that SMD. If it's exposed, yes, I think it would be picked up. If it's recessed back into a luminaire and it shines through a diffuser of some sort, be it a profile or what have you, I can't see it picking it up.
All right, and that ends the webinar for today. Thank you, David, and thank you all the panelists and all the attendees who attended today's presentation. So we hope that you'll return for the ongoing webinar series during this time of isolation, and hope that you found this very informative and will carry this information into your everyday work and maybe into your home lives as well. The webinar will be made available on the IES website in due course. The remaining questions that we have, we'll try to answer those and put those up on the website as well. So again, thank you very much. Keep an eye out for the IES news bulletin and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Take care.